At my own son's memorial, my daughter-in-law handed me an envelope and told me I had 1 month to get out of my own home. On Thomas Mitchell, what I did next would rewrite our family's future. Picture the worst day of your life. The grief is a physical weight. And then the person who should be your family leans in and says, "The arrangements are made? You have 30 days?" She called me a financial drain in front of our closest friends. But what Elizabeth didn't realize was that the foundation she was standing on was about to crumble. The house she was claiming, I laid its foundation with my own hands. The wealth she thought was hers, over $800,000, all of it mine. For nearly a decade, she enjoyed the comfort my resources provided, all while looking down on me. I didn't argue. I simply nodded. Sometimes the most powerful answer is no answer at all. If you're new here, please subscribe. I share narratives about reclaiming your dignity, and you'll want to see how this concludes because the letter Elizabeth received, just 72 hours later, taught us both that pride comes before a devastating fall. Let me take you back to the start. The warnings were visible from the very first day. I just didn't want to acknowledge them. When my son Michael passed away unexpectedly, Elizabeth immediately took command. "Don't trouble yourself with the details, Thomas," she'd said. "I'll manage it all." Her true meaning was clear. Stay out of my path. At the funeral home, she controlled every single element. The urn, the floral arrangements, even the readings. When I mentioned Michael's favorite poem, the one his mother and I read to him as a boy, she interrupted. "That's far too somber, Thomas," Elizabeth stated. "We need something with more hope." I observed her directing the gathering in her designer black dress, orchestrating people as if she were the producer of this sad event. And I sat in my simple, dark suit, the same one I'd worn when I lost my wife Helen, feeling completely unseen. The next red flag appeared during the gathering at our home. My home in every legal sense, though Elizabeth had been acting as if it were hers since Michael's passing. She pulled me into the study. "Thomas, we must discuss your circumstances." "My circumstances?" "You relied on Michael financially. Now that he's no longer with us," she let the sentence hang. "I cannot shoulder that load. That term struck me with unexpected force. I've been more than fair allowing you to remain here," she went on. "But this property is mine now." "Everything belongs to me?" "Michael left it all to me." I gave a slow, deliberate nod. Elizabeth interpreted that nod as surrender. What she failed to perceive was strategy. She had no clue that Michael had never held the title to this home. He resided here, certainly. Grew up within these walls, without a doubt. But owned it? Absolutely not. She also was unaware of the safe in my office. A fireproof box containing 40 years of meticulously ordered financial history. The accountant in me never discarded a single record. Most crucially, she was ignorant of the legal entity I had created. But I'm moving too fast. The funeral attendees witnessed the performance Elizabeth wanted them to see. A prosperous interior designer managing a family tragedy, and an elderly gentleman who seemed unable to cope. They watched her accept sympathies as if she were now the head of the household. Meanwhile, I sat quietly in Michael's favorite armchair, the one we gave him when he graduated college, and overheard her depict me as the helpless father. "Thomas is struggling to cope," I heard her tell our longtime neighbor, Carol. "The poor man doesn't grasp money matters. Michael managed everything for him." Carol gave me a pitying glance. She'd known me for over 3 decades, since the week I first surveyed this land, but even she appeared to buy into Elizabeth's narrative. That's when I understood a fundamental truth. People perceive what they are conditioned to perceive. Elizabeth expected to see a bereaved father who couldn't manage his affairs. So that is precisely what she saw. The modest sedan I drove, the plain clothes I preferred, the quiet manner in which I processed my loss instead of performing it. She mistook simplicity for incapability, silence for frailty, generosity for desperation. It was a natural error to make. I'd spent the 2 years since Helen's departure living a pared-down existence. No desire for luxury items or status symbols when you're navigating life alone. Michael understood that. He respected my decision to simplify. But Elizabeth, she measured a person's value by external displays, by noise, by who held the microphone. She was on the verge of discovering that the most formidable individual in any room is often the one who feels no need to perform. As the final guests departed that evening, Elizabeth confronted me by the staircase. I was completely serious, Thomas. This living situation is no longer viable. I glanced around the family room. I'd paneled myself. The hardwood floors I'd sanded and finished. The bookshelves I'd constructed with Michael when he was 14. I understand, I replied softly. But Elizabeth had no conception of what I truly understood, and she certainly had no inkling of what was soon to follow. Wednesday morning arrived with clarity and a strong cup of coffee. I sat at my kitchen table, the one Helen and I found at a flea market, and I wrote a list. Not of what I was losing, but of what Elizabeth believed she was gaining. The house, 2,500 square feet of memories in a quiet suburb. Current market value, according to Elizabeth's own professional estimates, $450,000. The life insurance, Michael's policy from his architecture firm, $175,000. Elizabeth had already begun mentally spending those funds. The furnishings, everything from Helen's vintage writing desk to Michael's architecture folios, not monetarily valuable to outsiders but irreplaceable to me. My self-respect. Watching Elizabeth conduct herself as if she'd been handed a fortune when she had, in fact, inherited nothing. But here's what truly cut deepest. It wasn't the money or even the property. It was the systematic deletion. Elizabeth was methodically wiping away every marker of the life Helen and I had created here. She'd already stored Helen's photographs in a box. Michael's school awards were removed from the hallway. Even my old professional licenses had been taken down from the office wall. I'm modernizing, she explained when I inquired about Helen's pictures. Michael always said this place needed to be brought into this century, modernizing, as if decades of shared history were obsolete technology. She gave me 30 days. 30 days to find new lodging on what she presumed was a fixed income and little else. 30 days to pack up a lifetime and act as if it never occurred. The most callous part was the sheer confidence with which she did it all, the absolute certainty that she held all the winning cards. That Tuesday, she'd given me a printed schedule, actually printed it out as if I were a tenant being formally evicted. December 1st, she declared, indicating the date highlighted in red. That gives you sufficient time to locate a suitable retirement community? Your circumstances? There was that phrase again. I've already researched several options, she continued, producing brochures as if she were granting me a boon. Harbor View Senior Living has vacancies. It's only $900 monthly for a single room, $900 a month. She expected me to spend my entire assumed income on rent and then somehow live on air. What about food? I asked. Transportation, healthcare? She shrugged. There are assistance programs for people in your position. The state provides for elderly citizens. The state. As if I were some public charge who'd never paid taxes or built a thing. That's when I realized Elizabeth didn't merely want me gone. She wanted me to be thankful for the chance to leave. She wanted me to express gratitude for 30 days instead of being thrown out immediately. To accept that this was simply the new order of things now that Michael was gone. But Wednesday morning, sitting with my coffee and my list, I came to a different conclusion. Elizabeth had made one fatal assumption, that Michael owned everything she was laying claim to. She'd been married to him for 8 years. She'd lived in this dwelling for 8 years. She'd likely never laid eyes on a property deed or a tax bill or any paper that proved ownership. Why would she? Michael handled the household finances just as his mother and I had raised him to. The man looks after the books. Perhaps old school, but it worked for our family. Except Michael had never actually managed my finances. He'd assisted me with household tasks, of course, picked up prescriptions when I was unwell, drove me to appointments after Helen passed, but the investments, the assets, the real estate, that had always remained under my control. Elizabeth witnessed Michael's helpfulness and assumed dependence. She saw my appreciation and assumed obligation. She saw 2 years of quiet mourning and assumed defeat if I remained silent. If I simply packed my bags and meekly relocated to Harbor View like a compliant senior, what lesson would that impart? That aggressors prevail, that loudness overcomes truth, that if you're sufficiently noisy and self-assured, you can erase history and take another person's life, that respect is optional when dealing with the elderly, that my 40-year marriage to Helen meant nothing, that the home we built together was merely timber and plaster, that the son we raised here could be forgotten as easily as trophies stored in an attic. The stakes were not merely monetary, they were about my very identity. But I possessed something Elizabeth knew nothing about, something that would turn the tables completely. I just needed to select the perfect moment to reveal it. And that moment was approaching faster than she could imagine. Thursday morning, Elizabeth let herself into my home with Michael's key. I was finishing breakfast when I heard the front door unlock. No doorbell, no greeting. She entered as if she were the proprietor, which in her mind she was. "Thomas, we need to have a conversation," she announced, striding into the kitchen with a leather portfolio. "Regarding what?" Your financial picture." She took a seat across from me without an invitation. "I've been considering your circumstances, and I need to know the exact figures." "Michael was covering for you." I took a slow sip of coffee. "Such as?" The utilities, the property taxes, the insurance." She opened her portfolio and produced a notepad filled with her writing. "Michael never shared the specific amounts, but I require them for my budgeting." "Budget for what?" For assuming those payments." "Of course." She looked at me as if I were dim. "Until you relocate, I'll need to cover all the expenses." "Michael was covering for you." I set my mug down. "And what precisely do you believe Michael was covering?" Everything. The mortgage, the taxes, the power bill." "You're on a fixed income, Thomas." "It doesn't stretch that far." "Is that what Michael told you?" Elizabeth's pen halted. "What are you implying?" Did Michael explicitly state he was paying my bills?" He didn't need to state it. It's apparent." She gestured around the kitchen. "How else could you afford to reside here?" "This home is valued at over $400,000. "And how do you know its value?" I'm an interior designer." "Thomas, I know the market in this neighborhood." "But you've never seen the deed." The question lingered in the air. Elizabeth's assured demeanor wavered for a heartbeat. "I don't require the deed. Michael inherited this home when your wife died." "Did he?" Of course he did. Who else would have received it?" I stood up slowly and walked to the counter, rinsing my mug with deliberate calm. "You know, Elizabeth, you've made numerous presumptions about my finances." "They're not presumptions. They're facts." "Really? What other facts do you possess?" She consulted her notepad. "Michael told me you never contributed financially to this household." I turned around. "Is that what Michael told you?" Yes. Yes, fascinating. Because I constructed this home in 1988. Paid cash for the land, hired the crew, oversaw every phase of the build." Elizabeth's expression hardened. "That was 36 years ago. Circumstances change. Some things do not. Ownership is one of them. Look, Thomas, I realize this is difficult for you. Losing Michael, confronting the reality of your financial position, but denial is not a solution." "What denial?" Pretending you aren't reliant on family support." The term support landed like a physical blow. I dried my hands on a towel. "Taking my time, Elizabeth, let me pose a question." "What?" In 8 years of marriage, did Michael ever show you a mortgage statement?" We maintain separate finances." "Did he ever mention making house payments?" We didn't discuss every line item of his spending." Did you ever observe him writing a check for the property taxes?" Her silence was all the answer I needed. "Here's my theory," I said, leaning against the counter. "Michael assisted me with errands, handled some yard work, and you inferred that meant he was supporting me financially?" Because that is what the evidence suggested. Appearances can be profoundly misleading." Elizabeth stood, visibly irritated. "Fine. Produce the deed. Prove you own this. Property. I am not obligated to prove anything to you. Yes, you are, because I am Michael's widow and I inherited his entire estate. Did you? Stop responding with questions. Stop making unfounded assumptions. We stared at one another across the kitchen. Elizabeth's jaw was tight, her professional poise fracturing. You have until December 1st? She stated finally. After that date, I am having the locks changed. We shall see about that. She gathered her papers and marched toward the door. We shall see about what? But I merely offered a faint smile and began loading the dishwasher. Some discussions are best concluded with legal counsel, present. Friday afternoon. I undertook a task I hadn't performed in many months. I went into my home office. The office had always been my command. Center. Helen used to tease that I was like a historian in there, archiving every document and invoice as if they were precious artifacts. You never know when you'll require evidence, I'd tell her. She'd smile and remark that most people didn't retain 30 years of bank records, but I was not most people. I was a retired accountant who'd learned young that paper trails, narrate history, and history shields you when recollections fade or individuals deceive. You know, Elizabeth, you've made numerous presumptions about my finances. They're not presumptions. They're facts. Really? What other facts do you possess? She consulted her notepad. Michael told me you never contributed financially to this household. I turned around. Is that what Michael told you? Yes, fascinating. Because I constructed this home in 1988, paid cash for the land, hired the crew, oversaw every phase of the build. Elizabeth's expression hardened. That was 36 years ago. Circumstances change. Some things do not. Ownership is one of them. Look, Thomas, I realize this is difficult for you, losing Michael, confronting the reality of your financial position. But denial is not a solution. What denial? Pretending you aren't reliant on family support. The term support landed like a physical blow. I dried my hands on a towel, taking my time. Elizabeth, let me pose a question. What? Inch, in 8 years of marriage, did Michael ever show you a mortgage statement? We maintain separate finances. Did he ever mention making house payments? We didn't discuss every line item of his spending. Did you ever observe him writing a check for the property taxes? Her silence was all the answer I needed. Here is my theory, I said, leaning against the counter. Michael assisted me with errands, handled some yard work, and you inferred that meant he was supporting me financially? Because that is what the evidence suggested. Appearances can be profoundly misleading. Elizabeth stood, visibly irritated. Fine, produce the deed. Prove you own this property. I am not obligated to prove anything to you. Yes, you are, because I am Michael's widow and I inherited his entire estate. Did you? Inch, stop responding with questions. Stop making unfounded assumptions. We stared at one another across the kitchen. Elizabeth's jaw was tight, her professional poise fracturing. You have until December 1st, she stated finally. After that date, I'm having the locks changed. We shall see about that. She gathered her papers and marched toward the door. We shall see about what? But I merely offered a faint smile and began loading the dishwasher. Some discussions are best concluded with legal counsel present. Friday afternoon, I undertook a task I hadn't performed in many months. I went into my home office. The office had always been my command center. Helen used to tease that I was like a historian in there, archiving every document and invoice as if they were precious artifacts. You never know when you'll require evidence, I'd tell her. She'd smile and remark that most people didn't retain 30 years of bank records, but I was not most people. I was a retired accountant who'd learned young that paper trails, narrate history, and history shields you when recollections fade or individuals deceive. The safe stood precisely where I'd left it, a fireproof box containing meticulous organization, each section labeled by year, each document categorized, each record filed by date. It was a thing of beauty in its own way. I opened it. The 1980s, the era that defined everything. Inside, I located the file I sought. Real estate, 212 Oak Lane, yes, 212. The address Elizabeth believed she now possessed. The initial document was the original land sale contract. April 10th, 1988, Thomas Mitchell. Purchaser, $47,000 for the plot. The subsequent document was the building agreement, Carter Construction. No relation, just a coincidence. $82,000 for a custom build. The third document was the most critical. The original title recorded. April 14th, 1988. Owner, Thomas Mitchell. Sole proprietor, no co-owner, no loan. I'd paid cash for the entirety. Elizabeth was clueless, naturally. She'd been a young girl in 1988, likely learning to ride a bicycle while I was learning to interpret architectural plans. But there was more in that file. Much more. Insurance documents, property tax receipts, utility setup forms, all in my name, all paid by me. All demonstrating uninterrupted ownership for 36 years. Michael's name was absent from every one of these papers. I examined the 1990s files. More of the same. Property taxes paid every year by Thomas Mitchell. Insurance payments made by Thomas Mitchell. Even the gardening invoices were in my name. The 2000s told the identical story, and the 2010s, and the most current file from this year. But the genuine surprise was in a separate folder labeled Trust Private. This was the folder Elizabeth definitely knew nothing about. Inside were papers that would alter everything. Documents that narrated a story she couldn't fathom. The first sheet was a trust agreement dated July 20th, 1986, before Michael was even born. The Thomas and Helen Mitchell family trust. The second sheet was a bank statement from Central Trust Bank, current. Balance as of last month, $857,000. The third sheet was a list of the trust's beneficiaries. Michael's name was there, yes, but not as an heir. As a beneficiary during his life, with very particular stipulations, terms that Elizabeth had never bothered to learn about. The trust was intricate, as these instruments always are, but the fundamental framework was straightforward. Helen and I were the original trustees. After Helen's passing, I became the sole trustee. Michael received monthly stipends for his education, housing support, and general welfare, but ownership? That perpetually remained with the trust, which meant it remained with me. Michael had lived well because I ensured he lived well. The architecture degree won partially funded, the wedding I contributed to, the various opportunities that came his way. All of it originated from this trust. All of it stayed under my authority, Elizabeth observed. Michael's comfortable existence and assumed he was self-made. She saw his kindness toward me and assumed it sprang from his own earnings. She never contemplated that the resources flowing from Michael to me were actually my own resources cycling back. It's intriguing how assumptions operate. You see what confirms your beliefs and disregard what contradicts them. Elizabeth expected successful young professionals to support their aging parents. So when she saw Michael aiding me, she assumed dependency. She never entertained the possibility that I was the one aiding him. But there was one final document in that folder, one that would prove most significant when the time for truth arrived. Michael's life insurance policy, $175,000, just as Elizabeth had said. But the recipient wasn't Elizabeth. The recipient was the Thomas and Helen Mitchell Family Trust, which meant the recipient was me. Elizabeth had been allocating funds that were never hers to allocate, making plans with assets that belonged to another, constructing a future on a base that was non-existent. I closed the safe and returned upstairs. In the kitchen, I prepared a simple lunch and contemplated timing. Elizabeth had given me until December 1st to vacate. Today was November 5th. That afforded me precisely 26 days to determine how to manage this predicament. I could telephone her immediately, clarify the truth, present the documents, watch her perception of reality disintegrate in real time. Or I could wait, allow her to continue her assumptions, let her excavate the hole deeper, permit her to learn this lesson the hard way as I ate. I recalled a saying from my former mentor, Thomas. Sometimes the most effective strategy is to let your opponent articulate their own defeat. Elizabeth was certainly articulating her own defeat. The question was, how profound did I want the hole to be before I offered a ladder? I looked around the kitchen I'd sketched out 36 years prior, the cabinets I'd selected, the tiles I'd laid, the windows I'd specified, my home, my trust, my decision. Elizabeth was about to learn that dignity is not negotiable. But first, she needed to finish digging. Sunday morning delivered the pinnacle of Elizabeth's audacity. I was preparing for my weekly walk when she arrived with two of her designer colleagues. She'd invited them for what she termed a pre-renovation walkthrough. I heard them before I saw them, Elizabeth's voice penetrating the front door. The structure is solid, but the aesthetic is desperately dated. Very traditional elder style. You know, they traverse my home as if it were already theirs. Wow, Elizabeth, these built-ins are amazing, remarked a woman with a sharp blonde bob. Original from 1988? Elizabeth responded. Thomas built the place, but his taste is classic. Look at this lighting, said another, and this furniture. It's a time capsule. I stood at the top of the staircase, listening to them inventory my life's work as if it were a design flaw. The potential is definitely here, the blonde said. But you'll need to completely reimagine the kitchen. These countertops are so dated, already in the plans, Elizabeth said. Thomas will be transitioning to a senior facility shortly, so I'll have total creative freedom. Total creative freedom in my kitchen, the one Helen and I had spent a year designing. I descended the stairs wearing my walking shoes. 3 women I didn't recognize were standing in my living room, taking measurements. Thomas, Elizabeth's tone was artificially sweet. Perfect timing. I wanted you to meet my colleagues. She introduced me as a novelty. This is Thomas, Michael's father. He's the original owner, but he's moving to a more manageable living arrangement. Transitioning, as if it were a corporate merger. Mr. Mitchell, said the blonde, your home has such charm. You must have poured your heart into it. Some, I said. Elizabeth tells us you're moving to Harborview. That's a lovely place. I looked at Elizabeth. Is that what I'm doing? We've been over this, Thomas. December 1st, remember? I recall you stating it. An awkward quiet fell over the group. The designers exchanged looks. Well, said the blonde, we should probably let you get to your walk. Actually, Elizabeth interjected. Thomas, while everyone is here, perhaps you could inform them about the upkeep issues. The plumbing, the electrical. There were no plumbing issues. The electrical panel was updated last year. I'm not aware of any upkeep issues, I stated carefully. Thomas, you know, the guest bathroom sink runs slowly, and the garage door sticks sometimes. The sink needed a new washer. The garage door had been fixed. Elizabeth's smile became strained. Thomas is very connected to this property. Sometimes he overlooks issues that are clear to others. Issues like what? I inquired. Like the reality that you cannot afford the upkeep on a house of this scale. Anymore, the room fell silent. Even the designers appeared uncomfortable. Cannot afford it? I asked. Thomas, we've discussed this. Your assumed income scarcely covers your essentials. And you know this how? Because I have eyes. You drive a 12-year-old car? You use discount grocers. You haven't upgraded a single thing here in 20 years. One of the designers cleared her throat. Perhaps we should reschedule this. No, it's fine, Elizabeth said. Thomas comprehends the situation. He's had 2 years to adjust to his new reality since Helen died. What reality is that? I asked. That you're a man in his late 60s on a fixed budget who can't maintain a 2,500 square foot home, late 60s? I'm 68. The point is you are making presumptions about my financial status. They're not presumptions, Thomas. They're observations. Observations of what? Observations that you've been living on Michael's goodwill for 2 years, and now that Michael is gone, you must confront the facts. The words hung heavily in the air. The 3 designers were actively seeking an escape route. Michael's goodwill, I repeated. Yes, Michael covered your property taxes. Michael handled your utilities. Michael ensured you had food and health care. Did he? You know he did, and you know this because I was his wife. I saw him managing the accounts. Did you see him write checks to the city for property taxes? He handled those electronically. Did you see him pay my electricity bill? He transferred funds to your account. Did you ever see bank statements confirming these transfers? We kept our finances separate, so you never actually witnessed any of these transactions. The blonde designer stepped forward. You know, Elizabeth, this seems like a private family matter. We should give you space. No, Elizabeth said sharply. This needs to be said, Thomas. You cannot continue living in denial about your financial picture. What denial? The denial that you are anything other than a liability. The term reverberated through the room. Even Elizabeth seemed startled she had voiced it aloud. A liability, I said quietly. I'm sorry, but yes, you are a liability. You have been since Helen passed. Michael was too decent to say it, but someone must. Too decent to say what? That supporting you was draining his resources. Draining him? Yes, the property taxes alone are nearly $9,000 annually. Add in utilities, maintenance, your medical costs. She was gaining momentum now, unleashing months of pent-up frustration. Michael spent at least $45,000 last year keeping you afloat. $45,000. And now he's gone, and I'm expected to take on that burden. I have my own future to consider. The designers were inching toward the door. So you're evicting me? I said. I'm giving you a month to find appropriate housing. That's more consideration than many would offer. Consideration. Yes, consideration. Because, frankly, Thomas, you never contributed to Michael's achievements. He built his own career, earned his own income, purchased his own home. This home? Yes, this home. Michael inherited it from Helen, and now I inherit it from Michael. That's how the law functions. I nodded slowly. I see. Good, finally. Elizabeth? What? You might wish to verify your information. Before making declarations like that in front of witnesses, she laughed, a short, harsh sound. What information, Thomas? I am a design professional. I understand how property ownership functions. Do you? Better than you do. It seems. I looked at the three women near the entrance. They were observing a spectacle they hadn't anticipated. Ladies, I said, you might want to request that Elizabeth show you the title to this property before you begin drafting renovation plans. Elizabeth's face lost all color. Thomas, don't what? Don't state the facts? But I had said sufficient. Sometimes the most fitting consequence is allowing people to construct their own trap with their words. Enjoy your consultation, I said and moved toward the front door. I had a scheduled meeting with my lawyer. The quietest people often hold the deepest wells of strength. Monday morning, I sat in attorney Helen Carter's office with 3 folders on the polished desk between us. Helen Carter, no relation to my late wife, just another of life's symmetries, had managed my legal affairs for 15 years. She understood precisely what those folders held. Thomas, she said, adjusting her glasses. I need to confirm. Are you certain you wish to proceed? I am certain, because once we initiate this process, there is no retracting it. Elizabeth will learn everything. Good. Helen opened the first folder. Let's review the evidence. The original title for 212 Oak Lane lay on top. Thomas Mitchell, sole owner. Recorded April 14, 1988. No co-owners, Helen noted. No shared ownership, no loan. You paid cash? Correct. She opened the second folder. Property tax records for 36 years. All paid by you from your accounts. Correct? Insurance policies, utility accounts, service contracts, all in your name. Correct. She opened the third folder. And this is the significant one. The Thomas and Helen Mitchell Family Trust. The trust documents were dense, complicated, full of legal terminology that took years to perfect and decades to fund. Current balance? Helen asked, though she already knew the figure. $857,000 as of last week. And Michael's role in the trust? Beneficiary during his lifetime? Never a trustee, never an owner. Helen leaned back in her chair. Thomas, this is a considerable estate. Elizabeth was completely unaware. Entirely. And Michael never explained the trust structure to her. Michael was a wonderful son, but he wasn't particularly engaged with the details of finance. He knew I provided for him when he needed it. He likely never thought to clarify the source. So, Elizabeth assumed Michael was supporting you, rather than the reverse? Helen shook her head. It's logical, I suppose. Young couples aren't typically backed by a trust of this magnitude. The irony is profound, I said. Elizabeth attempted to remove me from my own home, using my own resources to threaten me. How so? Michael's life insurance, $175,000. She's been planning with those funds for 2 months. But the beneficiary is the trust, which means the beneficiary is you. Helen entered numbers into her calculator. So let me be certain I grasp this. Elizabeth believes she inherited a $450,000 house and $175,000 in insurance. That is correct. But in reality, she inherited nothing. The house belongs to you, and the insurance proceeds go to your trust. That is correct. And she's been treating you as a charity case while planning to expend over $500,000 that was never hers. That is correct. Helen was quiet for a long moment, processing the situation. Thomas, I must ask, why did you allow this to continue for 2 months? Why not correct her misconceptions immediately? I reflected on that Sunday morning scene, Elizabeth labeling me a liability in front of her peers, the casual brutality of it, because I needed to witness the full extent of her actions. As she revealed it, she did? Helen nodded. What is your objective now? I want to establish unambiguous boundaries. Legal boundaries? All boundaries. She retrieved a legal pad. Tell me. First, I want the insurance claim processed immediately. The funds belong to the trust, not to Elizabeth. Done. That is straightforward. Second, I want Elizabeth formally notified that she is a tenant in my home, not the owner. Also straightforward. How much notice? 30 days. The identical time frame she allotted me. Helen allowed a slight smile. Poetic. I want her to comprehend the precise nature of Michael's relationship to the trust, so she cannot claim ignorance. Moving forward, we can supply complete documentation. And fourth, I paused, I want witnesses present during this conversation. Witnesses? The same design colleagues who heard her call me a liability. They should hear the truth as well. Helen set down her pen. Thomas, that feels intentionally humiliating. No. Intentional humiliation is what Elizabeth did to me. This is public accountability. There is a distinction. Elizabeth shamed me to elevate herself. I am ensuring the record is corrected to prevent future misinterpretations. Helen considered this. The designers are not required for the legal process, but they are essential for the social. Reckoning, explain. Elizabeth spent 2 months informing people that I am a destitute old man living on family charity. Those individuals deserve to know the truth. And Elizabeth deserves to hear that truth before the same audience. She misled precisely. Helen made notes. When do you wish to do this? Tomorrow. Grant Elizabeth 24 hours to dwell in her assumptions. If she refuses to meet, we serve the papers without discussion and allow her to deduce the rest. Helen checked her calendar. I can have everything prepared for 10. Adotten. Tomorrow. Ideal. Where do you prefer to meet? Elizabeth's design studio, where her professional circle can observe what integrity looks like. Helen looked up from her calendar. Thomas, I've practiced law for 28 years. I've witnessed countless family disputes. This isn't truly about the money, is it? No, it is about the principle. It is about boundaries. Elizabeth must learn that you cannot mistreat people simply because you presume they are powerless. And if she had been respectful from the start, then we would be having a different conversation entirely. I would have explained the situation privately and assisted her transition toward independence. But she was not respectful. She was contemptuous. There is a chasm between grief and contempt. Helen closed the folders. I'll make the calls this afternoon. Thank you, Helen. For what it's worth, I believe Michael would approve of how you're handling this. I stood and shook her hand. Michael taught me something vital. What was that? That composed, resolved triumphs over bluster every time. He was a bright man. He learned from a demanding instructor. Life? No, love. Love taught him that respect is built, not bestowed. As I departed the law office, I considered Elizabeth's timeline. She had given me until December 1st to depart. Tomorrow was November 12th. She was about to discover that some deadlines are two-sided, and some assumptions carry a price steeper than one can pay. The quiet man was preparing to speak, and when quiet individuals finally choose to speak, wise people pay close attention. Elizabeth was about to determine precisely how wise she truly was. Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock, Helen Carter and I entered Design Innovations on Central Avenue. Elizabeth was at her desk, reviewing fabric swatches with a middle-aged couple. She glanced up as we entered, and her expression shifted from professional amiability to confusion, then to something akin to dread. Thomas, what are you doing here? We need to speak, I said calmly. Privately, the couple looked between us, sensing the tension. I'm with clients, Elizabeth said, her professional facade activating. Can this possibly wait? No, Helen Carter stated. Stepping forward, I am Helen Carter, of Carter Legal. We need to address some pressing legal matters concerning your late husband's estate. The words, legal and estate, had an immediate impact. The couple exchanged glances. Maybe we should reschedule, the husband said. No, it's fine, Elizabeth said quickly. Thomas, can you please wait in the conference room? I'll be right there. Actually, Helen said, I believe your associates should hear this as well. Elizabeth's face paled. My associates? The three ladies from Sunday. I understand they are planning renovations based on certain misconceptions that require correction. Around the studio, work slowed. Other designers pretended to focus on their tasks while clearly listening. Thomas, what is this about? Elizabeth's voice had a new sharpness. It's regarding the house, I said simply. We have already discussed the house. No. You discussed the house? I listened. Elizabeth's client couple was retreating toward the door. We'll call to reschedule. The waif said, Wait. Elizabeth called after them, but they were already gone. The blonde designer from Sunday? Anna approached cautiously. Elizabeth, is everything all right? Everything is fine, Elizabeth said tightly. Thomas is simply having trouble accepting his new living situation, actually. Helen said, opening her briefcase. Thomas is having trouble accepting his old living situation. What does that mean? Helen pulled out the first folder. It means we must clarify some misunderstandings regarding property. There are no misunderstandings, Elizabeth said. I inherited Michael's house. What house is that? Helen asked. 212 Oak Lane. And you possess documentation of this inheritance? Michael's will? Michael's will left his personal possessions to me, yes, his car, his belongings, his personal effects, and his house. Michael did not own a house. The words fell into the quiet, studio like pebbles into a still pond. All conversation ceased. What do you mean he didn't own a house? Elizabeth asked. Helen opened the folder and produced the title. 212 Oak Lane is owned by Thomas Mitchell. Purchased April 14th, 1988, no co-signers, no joint ownership, no mortgage. That's impossible. Here is the title, Elizabeth snatched the paper and read it. Her face went from pale to ashen. This must be a mistake, she said. Michael inherited this house when Helen died. Helen, Mitchell owned no real property. Everything was acquired by Thomas Mitchell prior to their marriage. Michael resided here his entire life as Thomas's son. In Thomas's home, Anna and the other designers were drawing nearer now, captivated despite themselves. I don't understand, Elizabeth said. Michael paid all the bills, the taxes, the utilities, everything. No, I said quietly. Michael assisted me with household matters. I paid all the bills. That's not true, Helen pulled out the second folder. Property tax records for 36 years, all paid by Thomas Mitchell. Insurance policies, she continued. Producing papers, all in Thomas Mitchell's name. Utility bills, bank statements, maintenance records, all Thomas Mitchell. Elizabeth stared at the documents, as if they were written in code. This doesn't make sense, she said. Michael had a good income. He was an architect. Michael was comfortable because Thomas ensured he was comfortable, Helen said. What does that mean? Helen pulled out the third folder. The Thomas and Helen Mitchell Family Trust, balance $857,000. The studio was utterly silent now. Michael was a lifetime beneficiary of the trust, Helen continued. Thomas provided financial support for Michael's education, his wedding, his various needs. You're saying Thomas was supporting Michael? I'm stating that Thomas was supporting his son from his own resources. Elizabeth sank into her desk chair. But Michael told me he was helping Thomas financially. Michael was helping Thomas practically. Groceries, rides, home repairs. Thomas was helping Michael financially. The life insurance? Elizabeth said suddenly. Michael's life insurance? That's mine. Helen pulled out another document. The beneficiary of Michael's life insurance policy is the Thomas and Helen Mitchell family trust. No, yes, those funds belong to Thomas. Elizabeth looked around the studio. Every designer was staring at her. The woman who had been so self-assured on Sunday, so certain of her inheritance, so dismissive of the older man's objections. Thomas, she said, her voice now small. I didn't know. You didn't ask. You could have told me. You could have, inquired with respect. Helen closed the folders. Elizabeth, you have 30 days to secure alternative housing. 30 days? The same timeline you gave Thomas? But where will I go? That is no longer Thomas's concern, Helen said. You are a capable professional with a career. I am confident you will determine a solution. Elizabeth looked at me with an expression I had never seen from her before. Deference. Thomas, I'm sorry, I made assumptions. Yes, you did. Can we work something out? Some arrangement? I considered the question. Around us, the design studio was perfectly still. Elizabeth, respect is not a negotiating point. It never was. I understand that now. Do you? Yes. Good, that is the initial step toward regaining it. Helen, and I turned to leave. Thomas, Elizabeth called after me. What happens now? I looked back. Now you learn what I have always understood. What's that? That quiet individuals are not feeble individuals. We are simply deliberate about when we employ our voice. And with that, we departed. The silence we left behind was more eloquent than any words. Never mistake a peaceful nature for a lack of power. By Thursday morning, the entire account had propagated through the local design network. I knew this because my neighbor, Carol, brought over a coffee and the latest news. Thomas, you should have seen Elizabeth at the market yesterday, Carol said. Settling into Helen's old spot at my kitchen table, she looked utterly defeated. In what way? Well, for one, she was buying generic brands, Elizabeth, who only ever purchased artisan everything. Carol stirred her coffee. And she was alone, usually. She has her designer friends fluttering around her like she's royalty. Perhaps they were occupied, or perhaps they're maintaining a distance now that reality is known. Carol had always been astute about social currents. What reality is that? I asked, though I knew the answer. That she spent 2 months treating you like a dependent while planning to spend capital? That was never hers. Carol shook her head. People are talking, Thomas. And the conversation is not favorable for Elizabeth. What are they saying? That she demonstrated terrible judgment, that she made financial assumptions without verifying the facts. And in design, facts about a property's history matter, precisely. Her studio manager called her in for a meeting yesterday. This was new information. How do you know that? Because my niece works at Design Innovations. She said the entire office was buzzing about Tuesday's events. Apparently, 2 separate clients have already requested to be reassigned to other designers. Why? Because if Elizabeth can't determine who holds the title to a house she's lived in for 8 years, how can she be trusted with their renovation budgets? I hadn't considered that angle, but it was logical. The design business was built on trust and meticulousness. Elizabeth had publicly displayed a deficiency in both. There's more, Carol continued. You know that couple she was consulting with when you arrived? They posted about it online. Something about avoiding a designer who doesn't comprehend property law. They included photos. It's gotten significant attention. The repercussions were spreading more rapidly than I'd predicted. My phone rang. Helen Carter, we have developments? Positive or negative? Depends on your viewpoint. Elizabeth's lawyer contacted me this morning. She retained counsel. Apparently, he wished to negotiate a settlement. What sort of settlement? Elizabeth would prefer to remain in the house for 6 months instead of 30 days. She's proposing to pay rent. How much rent? Inch, $2,000 monthly. I nearly chuckled. For a home valued at $450,000? Market rent is approximately $3,200. Yes. What was your response? That we would contemplate reasonable proposals. And what is reasonable? $3,500 monthly. First and last month paid in advance, plus a security deposit equivalent to 1 month's rent. So, $10,500 upfront. Correct. If she wishes to stay, she pays the market rate, like any other tenant. Can she manage that? That is not our problem. Her attorney implied it might be challenging, given her present situation. After I ended the call, Carol was studying my expression. Elizabeth wants to remain? She wants to pay below market rent to remain. And you said? I said she can pay market rent, like anyone else. Carol nodded in approval. Equity is equity. Friday afternoon brought another visitor. Michael's old university roommate, James. Thomas, I owe you an apology, he said at my doorway. For what? For believing Elizabeth's narrative, she told everyone. Michael was supporting you, and you accepted it. I did. And I'm sorry, I should have known better. James shifted his weight. The thing is, Michael always spoke about how much he admired your success, how you'd built this place from the ground up, how you'd managed your investments wisely, how you taught him about fiscal responsibility. So, why did you believe Elizabeth? Because it matched what I expected to see. Elderly man, deceased wife, successful son helping out. It seemed plausible. Assumptions. Once again, yeah, and I'm not the only one. Several of Michael's friends made the same assumption. Now we're all feeling rather foolish, and we're questioning what else Elizabeth might have misrepresented about Michael. This was a significant development. Elizabeth's credibility was eroding across multiple social networks. Saturday morning, Helen Carter called with the final update. Elizabeth's attorney called back. She cannot afford the rent, so she is moving out. She's moving out, but there is another matter. What? She is also leaving. Design Innovations, voluntarily. Let's term it a mutual decision. So, Elizabeth was losing her home and her professional position in the same week. Thomas, I must ask, do you feel any remorse about this outcome? I looked around my kitchen, the one Helen and I had planned together, the one Elizabeth had intended to demolish and rebuild. Elizabeth made choices. She elected to be cruel instead of compassionate. She elected assumptions over questions. She elected to belittle me before an audience. Now she encounters the consequences, the natural outcomes. I did not cost her clients. Her clients did that by losing faith in her. Judgment. Precisely. This is not vengeance. This is accountability. And Elizabeth? Elizabeth is learning that actions have repercussions. It is a lesson she should have learned long ago. Sunday morning, I sat in the park, reflecting on forgiveness and boundaries. I realized they were not mutually exclusive. I could forgive Elizabeth for her assumptions and still maintain firm boundaries regarding respect. I could forgive her contempt and still expect her to face the natural outcomes of her decisions. Forgiveness did not mean pretending the events never occurred. It meant accepting what happened and progressing with greater wisdom. Elizabeth was relocating the following weekend, and I was moving forward with a renewed understanding of my own quiet authority. Sometimes the most effective lesson you can provide is to allow people to instruct themselves. 3 weeks later, I was in my living room, reading, when the doorbell chimed. Elizabeth stood on my porch, holding a cardboard box. "Hello, Thomas." "Elizabeth, I discovered some items that belong to you. Photo albums from Michael's childhood. Some of Helen's handwritten journals." I opened the door wider. "Please come in." She placed the box on the coffee table and glanced around the room she had planned to transform. "It looks the same," she said. "Why would it be different?" "I'm not sure. I suppose I thought you might redecorate after everything. Some things do not require alteration." We sat in the quiet for a moment. "Thomas, I owe you more than an apology." "You owe me nothing." "Yes, I do. I treated you horribly. I made assumptions about your life, your finances, your value. I was cruel when I should have been thankful. And now I grasp something I should have understood from the very beginning." "What is that?" "That Michael learned his principles from someone. His compassion, his generosity, his quiet fortitude. He learned all of that from you?" I nodded. "Michael was a good son. He was." "And you were a good father?" I simply failed to see it because I was too preoccupied with my own assumptions. We all construct narratives, Elizabeth. The measure of our character is how we respond when those narratives are proven false. I am trying to learn from this. Good. I've accepted a position in another city. A fresh start, a new environment. Perhaps I can do better there. I hope you do. She rose to leave, then turned back. "Thomas, may I ask you one final thing?" "Of course. If I had been respectful from the start, if I had asked questions instead of issuing demands, would the outcome have been different?" I considered this. "Almost certainly. I would have assisted you in transitioning to independence, granted you time to find your footing. We might have discovered a way to honor Michael's memory together, rather than battling over it. Elizabeth picked up her purse. "I suppose respect truly isn't negotiable, is it?" "No, it is not. Thank you for teaching me that." After she departed, I opened the box. She had returned Michael's childhood photographs, Helen's personal journals, small treasures that had inadvertently been displaced. I reflected on the previous 3 months. The memorial, the confrontation, the legal resolution, the natural consequences. Elizabeth had learned a costly lesson about assumptions and respect, but I had learned something as well. I had learned that quiet strength does not equate to silent acceptance of disrespect. I had learned that boundaries are not barriers. They are the guidelines for healthy interaction. Most importantly, I had learned that sometimes the most potent action you can take is to simply speak your truth and allow others to contend with the outcomes of their own choices. Michael would have valued that lesson. Helen would have endorsed the composed manner in which I handled it. And I was at peace. If you've ever been underestimated because of your age, your quiet demeanor, or your simple way of living, let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to remind someone that respect is earned, not given? Sometimes the most powerful reply to disrespect is simply demonstrating they are wrong. And sometimes the most formidable people in the room are the ones who feel no need to prove anything at all. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Winds of Thought for more stories about finding strength in silence. Until next time, remember, a calm surface often hides immense depth.